James Mirtle of The Athletic joins me now. What's up, buddy? How we doing?
Good.
Good to have you back.
I'm back.
Yeah, it's nice to have you. Okay, so I mentioned that yesterday we end up seeing a lot of a top line where it's loaded up, and that's fine because they're chasing a game. But now they're without Tavares. I guess, we don't really have any information on Knies. But to start with this, if you're the Leafs, do you now actually look at experimenting with splitting more guys up because you're actually missing so much talent that you might just be forced into spreading it around?
Yeah, I was trying to make lines last night if Knies is out and Pacioretty's out and Dueur's out and Tavares is out, and it's like, oh boy, it feels like where we were back in November when you're missing 4 or 5 forwards and it's hard to do.
Yep.
It's hard to do. I was trying to come up with a combination where you could put Domi up with Matthews because that worked well late last season. But if you do that, it's even with Domi not producing you're getting really thin. I mean, who are you going to play at center?
Yep.
It's really tough. It's hard to even build 2 lines that you feel really good about offensively if those are the guys that you're missing.
Yeah.
Knies is such a big absence he's been playing 20 minutes a night and 7 goals in 9 games going into last night's game, 12 points in 9 games. He's been fantastic. And that top line was really having some games where they were taking over. And it's one of the guys you really didn't want to lose right now, and it leaves them in a tough spot.
So that's why last night I was thinking, and I don't know how much of the kind of preamble you heard there, but I kept thinking to myself, all right, we've spent a lot of this season looking at, hey, are they going to add a center? They got to focus on a center. They got to focus on a center because that's the one trouble spot with the team, because it feels like you added on the blue line and you got more talent there. And, hey, there's a conceivable way that Hakanpää comes back and he's fine. And there was a moment where you're like, is Myers any good? And turns out not really. Hey, you've got a top pairing that actually works, and OEL looks good. Maybe this isn't so much of a need. And, hey, Bobby McMahon has emerged, and Knies looks great. And so do you really need a winger? And now just seeing what they have here and knowing that you are leaning on guys like Max Pacioretty, who's older and hurt and has injury clauses, that, Bobby McMahon, as good as he's been, has had injury issues in the past. To me, it actually kind of feels like the Leafs sort of might be better served not trying to spend their assets on targeting one of these bigger fish or a guy that's going to come at more of a premium, but rather sort of spreading that around and saying, okay, if this team wants a first-round pick, which by all accounts is what Yanni Gourde could command just based on this market, even though, God, you look at his numbers and there's a lot that isn't overly encouraging there, especially for an older guy who's undersized and is supposed to play around the net and has been playing further and further from the net as of late.
And he's been hurt a lot this year too, so that's another thing that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, I just think what you've got to be looking at is a move for multiple players, and that's why Seattle to me still just feels like the fit, because when you look at these teams, they're the only ones that I see that have, multiple pieces that actually could fit in with this team and end up still being able to get more than what you would actually feel probably comfortable with on any given year when it comes to the actual prospect/pick value.
It's feeling pretty thin right now, like you said off the top, and they're just, you're even hearing that teams like Utah don't want to be sellers and want to go for it, even though they've got a 20% chance of getting in. And I think that's one thing that's going to work against there being a bunch of trades before the Four Nations is that there just aren't that many sellers. And it really feels like it's going to be a seller's market at this point, unless more teams fall out of it and start to put assets on the table. And so the landscape looks really challenging for the Leafs to me. I know that's not it's not going to make for great headlines, but it's just I don't know if they're going to be able to pull off a blockbuster. Maybe they find something. I know they're working and they're calling teams and they're looking around the league, but unless they're going to put bigger assets on the table, I don't know how you pry out some of those better pieces from Seattle. I mean, unless what you're talking about is bring in Tanev and Gourde and come up with some kind of a package there.
That's what I'm talking about.
For the 2 rental players. Yeah, I could see that.
I actually would even try to get it even bigger. Again, if you're they only have 3 things that matter, right? And depending on whether or not they can move Hill to B or teams want him or some other guys that are down in their development system that other teams might like, right? Like that happens from time to time where you go, wait, this guy was in the trade? Why? And it's like, oh, that team actually scouted him and they like him. But ultimately, they've got three pieces that really matter for this team. One is Cowan, one is Minton, one is the first-round pick in 2026. I just don't think that the first-round pick in 2026 is enough to like move the needle for anybody in what you describe as a seller's market. So you start to get into the territory that's fairly uncomfortable because, man, this team has just not had waves of talent come up and really help them. And you see how meaningful it is when a guy like Knies does that, or a guy like McMahon, who I know is older and it's not the traditional path. But when a guy like that comes up and helps them, how different you feel about the team and their chances. So it's not a perfect scenario. Absolutely it's not. But if I'm talking to Seattle, I'm saying, what does it take to get Alexiak? What does it take to get Gord? And what does it take to get Tanev? I'd like to be getting all three if I'm trying to move in a major piece like one of those young guys that you obviously don't really want to part with.
Yeah, I feel like probably the first-round pick's in play if Alexiak's part of the equation, just because it feels like with his size and, you know, how much he's played, and he's played for some good teams, I feel like that would be a market where you'd get multiple teams all of a sudden in there. And, you know, he's another lefty. I mean, that's one of the things.
You'd play on the right, though.
You'd have to feel comfortable that he's going to be good on the right. Mm-hmm. You know, he's going to be as good. So, but I mean, he's a hometown guy, mm-hmm. and that's been a fit that's been there for a few years that I think he would work here. So maybe. I mean, I haven't seen other teams saying, you know, he's available and he's being shopped around, but Seattle definitely needs to make some things happen. And they've got the young defenseman there in Riker Evans that's been playing pretty well. And, you know, yeah, that I could see that. But again, like I said, it's going to take a prime asset, and you lay it out pretty well. The Leafs have three of those, and I think they're going to try and get something done without giving up one of those three assets, but that just might not be possible at this deadline.
Yeah.
And they might need more than that, right? Like they might need, especially if they have all these injuries.
The only thing that I can think of that works in their favor, because you're right, it's a seller's market, right? Like if there's only a few teams that actually have pieces, yeah, it's going to end up happening. I just don't think that the rental thing for a Brock Nelson makes sense for the Leafs. I just don't see how it gets done. Like I just don't see how the Islanders and the Leafs end up looking at each other and going, hey, this makes sense for both sides, right? So I'm kind of removing those types of players from the equation. They had their Ryan O'Reilly chase and where they sacrificed multiple picks in order to bring him in. And I don't think that they're in a position where they can do something like that, given what little they have moving forward. Like you push in at this deadline and people be going, well, you're all in. It's like, okay, yeah, but what about next year? Like what about next season? If this thing looks even better under year 2 of Berube, and you're left with actually nothing, you know, like now you're talking about what, 2028 first round pick. You keep trying to kick these picks down the line. The thing that works in their favor is that I just have such a hard time believing that a team is going to give up a first round pick for a guy like Yanni Gourde, unless you're the Leafs. Like I think that the other guy that you mentioned, like, or that I said, Alexiak, like that's going to be coveted. Tanev's going to be coveted. But you look at some of the numbers, like Frank Saravelli did a great job of outlining Yanni Gourde and how it's like, man, this guy throughout his career has scored at the net. His distance in terms of average shot has drastically changed this season in terms of where he's getting his opportunities from. Shots per game down, points down, goals per game down. I know the center market's thin, but I just can't envision a scenario where there's like 12 teams that are champing, I was taught by Mike Jose yesterday, at the bit to try and get like a 5'9" guy who, despite being clutch in the playoffs, it's like it was a long time ago, and yeah, it doesn't really have any encouraging numbers.
It's just that all you need is one team that's willing to give up a first round pick,
I guess
right?
That's true.
And there's not, and there's other teams that need centers. So some team is going to take a chance on him, I think, at the cost of a late first rounder. I mean, that's my read of it. Maybe not. Maybe you can get it done with a second and a third or something like that. But with so few options available, there's going to be, you know, a team like, you know, Dallas or Colorado needs depth, or you know, there's some of these teams that are locked in and they really are in win now mode. Someone's going to do it, The big thing with Gord is the injuries too. I mean,
Yeah.
and they've played him at times this year on the fourth line. So I'm not surprised his shot distance is coming down. He hasn't been playing with very good players, and he hasn't been playing the kind of role that he's played in the past. But with beggars can't be choosers, right? Like there's just not. I don't see a lot available. You know, like I mentioned Utah. Like I thought maybe Bukestad would be another name to put in that, but it sounds like they want to try and go for it. So, you know, even taking names like that off the board, and Brock Nelson, like I feel like the Islanders are going to be in this situation too. Even if they've got a 20-25% chance of making it, I don't think they're going to be sellers. I think they're going to try and make the playoffs.
Well, that would be a little crazy for them. Like this
Well, they got a GM on the last. You know, this might be the last gasp there for him.
Yeah, I just there's got to become some point of realism, and it's kind of funny that the one team looking to make a fire sale that are publicly, anyways, is like the Penguins, and you're like, what do the Penguins have that you want? And you look at it and you go, nothing. You know, you don't have a single thing that fits with Toronto. But good news is that they're probably not going to be negotiating with you anyway. So it's like that's a team that's off the table. All of a sudden, the Predators are getting hot. And I was making the point yesterday. Yeah, they're probably likely to move off of a guy like Luke Shen if you send the right price over. But yeah. I can't envision them wanting to do a fire sale the way that it looked earlier in the season. Like, again, Chicago, what do they have? Nothing. What do you want from Chicago? Like, I've seen people do the Seth Jones thing. I don't know if that's realistic for Toronto. What do the Sharks and Ducks have that you're overly interested in? Like, is there any, it's just this market is.
Talk of Ryan Strome and Anaheim, but I mean, it's not. I mean, if he's on your third line, then maybe, but you know, there's a lot of money there and there's term there too. Yeah. So there's not great fits for the Leafs. I'm not really 100% sure what they're going to do. I think a lot of the talk right now is just talk because I don't think that there's anything concrete for them that they're excited about.
No.
You know, the Ryan O'Reilly keeps coming up because of the history, and that's a sexy name that's out there. But my prediction right now, and again, like I said, this is not going to make for amazing radio, and I'm not going to get radioed on this, is that it's not going to be an amazing trade deadline for the Leafs. That they're going to try and add depth pieces and make themselves a little bit better, kind of like they did last year.
Well, that seems like the safest outcome here in terms of what you're trying to predict. Because, like, again, just looking at the market, what is it going to be? And to my, I like the Seattle idea. I just look at that and say that addresses multiple needs for you and is actually somewhat exciting, right? Like I would really like it if this team brought in Brandon Tanev and Alexiak primarily. Like I'll admit it, I'm not crazy about the Yanni Gourde addition. I know this team needs a center, but I just for a first round pick and having to pay a premium to get them to keep them. And like I said, I don't even think it's going to cost you just a first round pick. You're talking those three guys all in one package deal. You're talking about, something that might actually really sting for players that it's something, right? Like it addresses a lot of your issues to a degree, but it doesn't put anything kind of like over the top where you're like, damn, now you're really moving, now you're really shaking. But like to this point about the market, if you're Seattle, why would you want to package all those players together when you could potentially split them up and bring back heavier pieces in a seller's market? Like you're like, wait, we're not throwing Jamie Alexiak in a deal. We're not just throwing Brandon Tanev in on a deal. We feel like we can get stuff for each of these guys and spread them around and bring back more. And they kind of have to, given where the state of the franchise is right now.
If it's Alexiak and Tanev, is the 2026 first round pick up for grabs in your mind? Like, what is it going to have to take for them to trade that pick?
Well,
because I don't see them moving Minton or Cowan right now. It doesn't really feel like that's what they want to do.
I think the only way that you can move Minton or Cowan is if it's like an actual bona fide guy, not a. The thing about those Seattle players that I mentioned is that they're still, to me, more like speculative in terms of how much they improve your team. If you're moving Easton Cowan or you're moving Fraser Minton, it has to be a deal where it's kind of like the McCabe thing, where you go, we know this guy is going to be a top 4 defenseman on our blue line, and we're getting term, and you're maybe even eating some of the money. Like, I just don't think that they're in a position where they can be flippant with one of those two assets, considering that, like, again, they just don't have anything else. Like, I think what you're hoping for in a trade like that with Seattle is that they care at all about Nick Robertson, right? Like, which I think it's kind of funny that we keep throwing him in trades, but it's like, okay, he's just a younger player who has shown the shot and some ability, maybe fresh start, but it's like, hey,
he probably gets thrown in the trade too.
Yeah,
like I don't think he's going to be on the playoff roster,
Yeah.
so like they might as well include him, even if it.
Yeah. So, but I think you're talking about like Robertson and a first, and then probably more. Like I don't see why Seattle is parting with what are essentially the only pieces that are at the deadline for anything short of that. Like I are certainly not rushing to it, right? Like the case I'm making here is you're trying to jump the market and say, hey, we see the way that this thing's trending and it doesn't look like it's getting any better. So we better be first to act on this because we're going to need this eventually. And if Seattle makes these moves without us, who are we left dealing with? So I think that's kind of the case that you're talking about, in which case, like you might end up paying a premium. There's a little bit more risk there when you jump the market because it might not end up working out for you. Like I don't know, prices maybe come down, more sellers emerge, whatever. There's a greater risk component there. And so I think that you'd have to compensate more in order to get that done, especially today with the way that things are going.
Yeah. Yeah. And the risk too isn't just that you overpay or that it's you're bringing in more depth pieces. You know, you're bringing in a 9th or 10th forward like they did last year with Connor Dewar. You're bringing in a 5th or 6th defenseman. And I know that doesn't excite anybody, but the landscape as it looks right now is pretty tough.
The thing is, though, I do think that some of those guys actually do have to be improvements because, like, with the 6th defenseman thing, and I know Luke Shen is actually different because there is proof of concept with him and Rielly, even though he's older, right? Like, that does seem to get left out and I mentioned this yesterday on Leafs Talk, when he was first brought in to play for the Leafs, most people assumed he would be the 7th defenseman and that he was partially brought in because he would be a complete team player if he had to sit games in the press box. And now it's like 2 years have gone by and you're going back to that same well. He was already an older player then. So, yeah, I'm not sure if it's going to work out as well as it did for you last time. But, I see I hate saying this because it's so improbable that he's healthy and good. But why would I be really wanting to bring in a 6th defenseman who can't really play or isn't a notable upgrade rather than just being like, whatever, let's just see if Hakanpää can work out and hopefully Connor Timmins can play. You know what I mean, though? It's like...
That's the Team Finland plan.
Sure, but I'm just saying that those two guys that are essentially the bump-out dudes, like, you got to be actually better than them for me to give up from a prospect pool or from a draft pick pool that already has little to nothing.
Then you watch that play that Timmins makes behind the net on the goal against, and you're like, do you really want that out there in the playoffs?
No.
Like, and that's what I was thinking watching that play is it feels like they got to get someone or I don't know. I think some people are starting to make the case that maybe they need a defenseman more than they need someone up front. And it's harder to make now with all the injuries that they've got, but they've been scoring pretty well when they've been healthy. Mm-hmm. And the blue line's been a big mishmash of, unless this Rielly, McCabe, Ekman Larson, Tanev thing works out here, then they probably need to start thinking about prioritizing getting someone on defense just as much as a center.
I'm already there. I just view it as what is the best available thing to you.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
I think that's the right idea.
Yeah. It's just, you're not specifically targeting one area. Cause to me, it's like you need a center and you need a defenseman. Like it's the two most glaring and obvious needs for this team. And maybe you can't address all of it. You have to conceivably address one of them. But again, it's just, I do the same thing as you, where I look at the landscape, I fire off texts, I try to check in on every insider, and I've yet to see a name or an idea that I go, ooh, that's a good one. Like Kipper yesterday threw out the idea of like trying to go after Dylan Cousins. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's probably not very realistic given what his money is and the team that he plays for and what it would look like if you tried to get something like that done. But that's kind of the point we're at here, right? Where you have to start getting real creative with your thought process because what's out there that's obvious sucks. Flat out. It just sucks. There's nothing interesting about this. And could I say the Ryan O'Reilly thing? I've been sitting on this for a while. This is the dumbest thing that the fan base has ever done. Like, okay, Ryan O'Reilly didn't want to be here. Like, he left. He left Toronto. Now he's in Nashville, the place that he wanted to be. And the thought is that he's going to, like, Toronto offered him more money. So what? He's going to come back to the place that he didn't want to be because, like, why? What exactly is the impetus? They're like, well, maybe now he can win. Yeah.
Well, the Leafs still are in love.
It's like, sure, you can still like the player and understand like how he would be a great fit for you and blah, 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 go on down the line. I just don't know why Ryan O'Reilly, who...
Well, maybe he has second thoughts. I mean, look how the season's gone there. Like, does he want to end his career down there? And he's not getting any younger.
Well, sure, but they also have been turning it around lately, and I would think that those guys have a lot of internal belief that, hey, we can turn this around, and hey, if we can keep something of this together going into next year, maybe it can be better. I think if you're the front office, you got to sell high on guys and go, ooh, this didn't work out, and I don't think it's going to get better in year 2. But yeah, I can't envision them just doing a full fire sale. And I also just don't think if Ryan O'Reilly's having second thoughts about being in Nashville, I would just think that what he's saying to them is, hey, if you are going to trade me somewhere else. I don't want to go back. Like I did the Toronto thing. I'm not interested in playing there for the rest of my career either. Like he already had that decision and he turned it down. Like I don't think that he's like stressing over it and going, God, I should have taken the money and stayed in Toronto. Doesn't like the bright lights. Don't come back.
Well, it sounds like the Nashville's going to go to him and that they're not going to he doesn't have a no trade clause, so they could send him wherever they want, but it doesn't sound like they want to send him somewhere he doesn't want to be.
Yeah.
And the other thing too, and again, they're going to want a lot for him. You know, he's got 2 more years on his deal. He had a great year as their first line center last season. I don't think they're going to want something that really matters back for him. And what is that if you're the Leafs that you're going to be trading?
Well, that's the kind of trade that is the Easton Cowan trade, where you go, okay, you're using this piece in order to get this guy. I hate the idea of it. Like, didn't want to be here. They tried to extend him. Didn't happen. I still will maintain that I know that he did not I know that he didn't love the coach. Like, since it's a different guy, so maybe that's a bit of a no pun intended factor for him. But yeah, I don't see it. Okay, so I said his name by accident, but it's on my mind and it's on everybody's mind. The Morgan Rielly thing, like on the ice again last night for another 2 goals, one of which, it's Hildeby's fault, but God, bad angle, bad strides, not good. Second goal, puck's lost in his feet. And when that one went in the net, I was looking at him and he looks like he's wearing it on the ice right now. Like, we've had all these conversations about crisis of confidence with certain players like Nylander and Berube addressed it. It feels like they're trying desperately to kind of protect Morgan Rielly from that kind of a narrative. And good on him. He's not someone that has shined away from cameras or from attention when it's come his way or hard questions have been asked. But yeah, I what do you do here? Like, you've got to, I think, if the McCabe thing doesn't work out, try this season to bring someone else in that can be his partner. But if I'm the Leafs, it absolutely changes my aggression level in terms of trying to fix him because I've tried other combinations and none of them have worked. And I don't know how much you're trying to bend to accommodate a guy that just has been giving you way, way, way under what his normal production and impact should be.
It's really interesting because you bring in a new coach and a new system, and they've brought Rielly's minutes down a lot from where he's been in this era of the team with, since they've had Matthews and Marner, he's been their number one defenseman. He's been at 23, 24 minutes a night. If you need a goal, playing even bigger minutes than that, and he's never been the perfect fit as a number one defenseman just because of the warts that he's got defensively. But this year, he's 30 now. I think 31 soon. He's got the new contract. You bring in the new coach with fresh eyes, and he says, you know what? This guy's not the number one defenseman. The minutes are going to be coming down. He played quite a bit last night because, they were trying to get the goal and playing with McCabe and everything. But
again, what impact did you see?
No, I know. And that's the thing is that, and I know people that if you look at some of those, some of the analytics that they've got now on skating speed and things like that stuff's come down for him. So anyway, he's playing fewer minutes for you. He's down averaging, I think, around 21 this year from where he used to be, and playing worse, and not on power play 1 and not producing offensively. I think he's on pace but going into the game last night, he was on pace for something like 34 points this season. And you're absolutely right. Like, you can see in the body language in his face, like, he knows. And I know in some of the comments that he's made this season that he knows it's a struggle, and he knows he's having a hard time adapting to a new coach and a new system and not having the wheels. I mean, that's always been the separator for him. He's never been a perfect player. He's never been a perfect number one defenseman, but he's always been able to skate better than most people on the ice. And he's been able to produce offensively and use his vision to create things, even if he doesn't have a great shot. And we're just not seeing as much of that this year. And that's a tough place to be. And, you know, sometimes what happens in a situation like this is a player has a season like this and they go into the offseason, he's like, I got to change some things. I got to like completely rethink how I do this because age is going to catch up with me. And it's, you know, I'm sure he wants to stay. You know, he's got a young family here now, and he's got roots here, and he loves being here. And maybe this is a wake-up call. You're saying it's a wake-up call for the team. I think that they're wide-eyed and they know what he is right now. Maybe it's a wake-up call for him too. And he's like, I'm going to have to be better than this. And I think that that's part of what happened with Tavares. Tavares only had 65 points last year. They take the captaincy away from him. He goes into the offseason. He says, you know what, I'm going to prove you wrong. And he has it, and he's had a great year. So maybe that's what you need from Rielly.
So I talked about it yesterday. I don't think that there's really a scenario where they approach him and ask him to waive the no move in season. But if we were talking about this market, right? Like, hey, there's not much out there. There is at least a slight case to be made of, hey, this is a very like good opportunity to kind of try to potentially like buy low on a player. Do you think there's any scenario where the Leafs would even consider that in season?
No.
Yeah,
I think it would be impossible.
Yeah.
It would be impossible. It's one of those ones where you need months to have the conversations, and you know, and there hasn't been a lot of willingness from the Leafs that I can think of to push a guy out that has a no move clause either. It seems like they've been respecting those the whole way along, because they've had opportunities here very recently where that could have made sense and they didn't do it. So
yeah, I don't think so either. And you mentioned the young family stuff and the roots and, again, wearing the letter and the way the organization feels about him. I just don't think that they would have I just don't think that they would take that approach, like in season, and go, hey, like, would you consider it? I think that would end up probably being disastrous for them, because my guess is he would say no, right? First of all, that he'd be like, yeah, I want to see it through here. And then you get the ripple effect of the player feeling like he's not wanted and that this is going to end up happening again. And then a member of your leadership core, people are aware that the team has like tried to move off of them during a season where you're trying to win. And you got to work with the player to try and get him back to where he was, because it's not that long ago that he was playing a lot better than this. And the thing too is the blue line's a little bit deeper than it's been in the past. You don't need him to play 24 minutes. You know, you've got Tanev and McCabe who can step up and play big minutes in the playoffs. So you just need him to find his lane as a number 2 or number 3 and figure out what he is in this system, when it's not just all about his legs and it's not just about creating off the rush. And get some more confidence in him. And you've got 3 games left here to do that. You know what the problem is, though, is that you have a top pairing that works. Like, you want to see more Tanev and McCabe. And if McCabe doesn't work with Morgan Rielly, right? If that's not an actual fit for the rest of the season, and you go into the offseason and you tried another partner with him, then I actually do think that you're going to have that hard conversation, because it just doesn't make sense. Because to me, you know, the top 2 defensemen on this team are very clear. It's very obvious. But what have you noticed watching Tanev play with OEL? Does it feel as though there's a difference between the impact he and Morgan Rielly are having? Like, I see one guy filtering pucks towards the net, kind of creating things, snapping the puck out of his zone. You know, he created the goal the other night that leads to the Matthews snipe. It's like, I don't know. He played huge minutes last night, too. Everybody's been dialing up the Ekman-Larsson minutes lately. That's what I mean, because guess what? He's playing better than Morgan Rielly, period. Yeah. Like, there's not a case against it. Like, who's better in front of the net? Who's better with gap control? Who's better at breaking up a play? Who is better at, snapping that puck out of the zone? Who's better shot? Like, Morgan Rielly's a better skater. He's the higher upside guy. But as of right now, like, if you've got 3 guys that are better than the dude that's making 7.5 and can't play on the right side for you and try to balance these things out, and then is actually more than 7.5 because you constantly have to be adding the quote unquote perfect fit next to him, and you don't really know exactly what that cost is going to be, then like if he's not a driver, it's more. So it's going to get uncomfortable in the offseason to me if this goes through a playoff run and he doesn't have his normal, hey, this guy was heart and soul incredible for them, and he drove the points up, and he drove the bus, and all these different things that have normally happened. Because that's the part of the Rielly conversation that I do think is being missed a little bit right now. This isn't just a this season issue. Like, this was happening last year with the other coach, and it just kind of flattened during the postseason because he was awesome with Luke Shen, and people threw that away and decided, hey, no more regular season caring about Morgan Rielly. But you look at the sample set now of back-to-back years for a guy that's getting a little bit older, and like I said, you got to evaluate
the Luke Shen year was 2 years ago too, right? So it's, you know, I mean, that is the thing though, like at least he's got ice in his veins and the market doesn't get to him and the big moment doesn't get to him. I mean, that's not nothing on this team where that's getting to a lot of other players.
Agreed.
So I still have some confidence that Morgan Rielly's going to make an impact in the playoffs. And I'm trying to think in the playoffs, him making a really negative impact defensively and hurting them. And I'm struggling to put my finger on that. So you just have to kind of have to hope that that's what happens.
I'm just saying that there's a little feeling of like a Jake Gardiner potential here. Just given
well,
what
Jake Gardiner, they didn't re-sign, right?
I know they didn't, but that's what I'm saying.
He got hurt, and then they ended up not doing that deal. So
right,
So
I'm just saying that he had a playoffs where he really hurt them in a meaningful game, and the noise got so loud that it was this is not reconcilable. And I have that same faith as you that he is a playoff type of player and that the things that you mentioned matter, especially to this team. But I'm also envisioning at least the possibility of the scenario where it doesn't have the bounce back and those things do happen. So, I'm thinking about it. Okay, so here's the other one. Limited trade market. If you're the Leafs and you're bringing Yarncroke back and you're thinking about potentially adding a bunch of those pieces like the, Alexiak or some of the Yanni Gourde money, whatever. Maybe it's not as splashy as those things, but either way, you got to bring in some money for a team that's pretty well capped out. Do you think that they would even explore the idea of getting out from Domi? Because it just has not worked this year. And again, if you're talking about who's making too much money in their spot on a team that's tight, and things are going to get better moving forward, right? Cap's apparently going to go up by potentially $4 million. That's nice for this team, gives them some breathing room. But for this season, if you're really trying to look at it and say, how do you improve this team? The further you go along, and he's just not providing, I think, pretty much any of what you're expecting him to do. Do you think that they at least look at it? And if they do you think that there would even be a market for him given the contract?
That's what I was going to say. I don't think anyone would want at $375 for 3 more years and the year that he's had.
I was gonna say you probably got to eat money, right?
Year, yeah. I think he's another one where you're hoping that it turns around, and that's why I've been playing around with you, trying to play him with Matthews and seeing if he can regain anything there. And maybe they don't want to do that because they don't like that look for the playoffs anyway, so they don't even want to contemplate it right now. But they got to do something to get him going because he's another guy that's got no confidence and hasn't really had it all year. And they played the second power play unit more, and you look at you guys were running the clips on Leafs Talk last night. It's like it's hard to watch how bad it is, and he's part of it. Like he's not just on the perimeter; he's like as close to the boards as you could get on power play 2, and as far away from the action, and just doing a deep outside cycle. And it just looks like a guy who's a bit lost right now, and that's on the coaching staff. I mean, they got to try and find a way to get what they can out of him. And I know he's not a perfect player. He never was. And that's why he's never signed a long contract before. And it's really biting the Leafs right now that they dedicated what little cap space they had in the offseason, so much of it to him.
So a couple things. One, I actually liked Pontus Holmberg's play during that 3-game winning streak.
Mm-hmm.
But when you put him up over Domi, it's a bad sign for Domi, right? Like, it's a really bad sign.
But can you blame them, though?
No. This is what I'm saying. You absolutely can't. Again, I think that it's going to be almost impossible for me to see him score 10 goals this season. Like, what's he at right now, 3 or 4? Somebody Google that for me.
I think it's 3.
Okay.
It's not good.
So you've got, I think, 34 games left, 33 games left. You think he's going to score 7 goals in those 33 games?
I do not.
I know where my money would be. I know where it would be. So you're talking about almost $4 million a season for a guy that can't get you 10 goals, and like the playmaking stuff. I don't know. Where's that? So people would say, well, you got to put him back up with Matthews, like you said, right? They had chemistry, and that's how he got going last year. And to me, right now, like given if Knies is out and Tavares is out, are you going to have a line with Max Domi, Austin Matthews, and Mitch Marner on it? Because
try and build the second and third line after that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Very difficult.
So then what? So you're going to remove Marner from Matthews and play him with who? Pontus Holmberg? He's going to set up the Pontus Holmberg shot. He's going to set up Fraser Minton, who's like, I don't know if Fraser Minton will also ever be capable of scoring 10 goals. Like it's not exactly the most enticing offensive skill set. I'm higher on the kid than I think most are, but in terms of right now, what they've got with no Tavares, who do you feel like you should put Marner with? And I get the idea of like driving a line and all your stars should be able to do that, but it's like with this guy in particular, a lot of the driving that he does is open up the space for other guys who can put the puck in the back of the net. And as of this moment, find me who that is. Like, you're going to put him with Bobby McMahon? Okay. Then who's Nylander going to play with? Like, it's really tough dominoes to try to figure out a way that you get Max Domi going outside of potentially putting him back at center with Nylander and maybe McMahon and saying, okay, like try to do this. But I don't know how much patience this coaching staff has for it, given, you know, the non-production paired with the liability in his own zone.
Yeah. I mean, that's always been the problem for Domi at center. And, you know, I think the contract got done because at least we're having a hard time finding another fit at center. And they thought at least Domi's a guy that if in a pinch they could play him there.
He had such a strong finish too, though, right? Like where it was like, oh, okay, like this guy looks like a fit and he looks like he gets it and he looks like he's bringing some of the elements that they're dying for.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't need another guy who in big moments right now is going to look like they're having shaken confidence, you know?
This roster doesn't work if Matthews or Tavares are out of the lineup. I mean, that's the bottom line.
No.
Like they just don't have the horses to fill in. They don't have enough guys. I mean, it's to the point where I was again looking at last night. I was like, man, maybe they got to think about Marner at center again, or I don't know what they do. Like, honestly, like they just don't have a lot of options right now.
Yeah. I mean, Nylander had those practices at center.
Yeah, well, that's why they needed to stick with that a little bit longer, because they were going to run into this situation.
Yeah. Okay, just a little quick rapid fire here before you go. Hill to be immediate future. Murray back for now?
And that's what I would do. I mean, he won again yesterday. I mean, his save percentage is, I think he leads into AHL. So I know Murray didn't look good earlier, but the guy he's had an entire year off. Mm-hmm. It's not out of the realm of possibility that he's getting better here as he's had a little bit more time. And certainly he's been winning and making saves in the AHL, and he's a veteran. And Hildeby looks like a guy that doesn't have a lot of confidence in the NHL. Like that first one goes in over his shoulder to the Fantilli, and Hildeby looked like he didn't want to be there.
Fell apart. Again, no one's writing him off because he's young, and like that's just the way that it can happen.
He's a project.
Yeah, but
exactly. He got drafted. He was like almost 21 years old. He was a reach when they picked him, and it's going to take him. He's not an NHL goalie until he's like 25, 26 years old.
Yeah, don't just think that it's time to let him go play more games with the Marlies. Stolar's timeline. Do we see him before the break?
I would be very surprised.
Mm-hmm. That was always my sense too, but then he started skating and was like, oh, okay, maybe. And it's like,
maybe a game. Maybe a game. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Last thing, Pacioretty injury. What do you think that timeline is?
I don't know.
Yeah.
But he's one where it's starting to be like, what you can't really count on him. Even when he was playing there towards the end, it would seem like you were getting less. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I don't know that what he can give you in the playoffs. Like I think his body can't deliver on what his heart and his mind wants to do anymore. And that's what happened last year in Washington. And it seems like you can get some good games from him and some good moments, but he's just not able to consistently do it. So I don't have an exact timeline, but
do you know what I would do?
Yep.
Cheat. I would cheat. I would pay him the $300,000 that he's supposed to get if he plays 4 more games under the table somehow. Be like, oh, what do you know? Like this showed up in this Cayman Islands account. There's $300,000 in here. No, but really, I'd be like, dude, how much money have you made in your career? Like, like maybe we'll even, wink, wink, give you another kind of one of these deals next year.
You know what the real problem with that money, JD, is? It's going to go on next year's cap. Like that bonus money, if you're at the cap, if you're in LTIR, it gets bumped to next year. So they're going to lose cap space next year for having Pacioretty. I didn't like that, the way they structured that deal.
No, but I'm saying that they're not going to do that. That they got to tell him, listen, you play a physical style now, and when you've been healthy and fresh, when you came back from the injury, you look good. And that's actually what we're going to need come playoff time. You're on LTIR. We're cheating. You're going there. Like who's going to be able to say that Max Pacioretty can't be on LTIR for 33 games? Like again, he's an older player who worked his ass off to get back, but like
you're going to have a whole LTIR line in the playoffs of Yarncroc and a bunch of guys.
But Yarncroc's going to come back. Like he's going to be back before playoffs.
Well, they're going to have to make that work under the cap too, which is going to be interesting.
But still, Pacioretty to LTIR. That's what I would do. That's what I would do with all my problems, by the way, is tell guys to cheat and go on LTIR and then bring them back. It works for Vegas. It's worked for Tampa. Like, why can't it work for you? Everybody should. I don't want to be the only team that's not cheating. Then you're just a sucker. Anyways, James Mirtle of The Athletic. Fun as always. Thanks for doing it, buddy.
Yeah, thanks, JD.
Talk to you next week.